I hated this night before it even began. Standing in front of the mirror, adjusting the cufflinks I'd barely noticed, I could hear her voice slicing through my thoughts. "Stay in the back. Don't embarrass me." The words were sharp, calculated, the kind that made you shrink even when you wanted to stand tall. And somehow I always did. I wanted to tell her I was more than a shadow in her life, more than a placeholder she could drag out for appearances. But I didn't. I never did. I only nodded, smiled faintly, and followed her lead, like a trained actor in a play where my role was to be invisible. The gala was a glittering trap, full of men in crisp suits, women in dresses that seemed designed to shame mine, and conversations I didn't belong in. I wasn't here for the champagne or the small talk. I was here because she wanted to be seen, and I, somehow, was the prop. As we entered the ballroom, the chatter hit me like a wall. Glasses clinked, laughter echoed, and I could feel the gaze of strangers brushing past me, dismissing me without a second thought. I tried to focus on the chandeliers, the soft golden glow that made the room feel luxurious, almost unreal, but it couldn't erase the sting of her words. Every step I took felt measured, careful, as if my very presence could topple the delicate facade she had built around us. She was already weaving through the crowd, introducing herself to people I didn't know, laughing at jokes I didn't understand. I trailed behind, unnoticed, invisible. And for a long moment, I resented myself for letting it happen. Why do I let her do this to me? I asked myself silently, gripping my glass of water so tightly it threatened to shatter. The cold weight in my hand grounded me, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside. I found a corner near the bar, pretending to admire a painting I didn't care about. The sound of heels clicking across the marble floor became a metronome, each step echoing the rhythm of my own self-doubt. And then I saw him. The new owner. I had heard rumors, an enigmatic figure, someone who commanded respect the moment he entered a room, someone who could change the course of my life in a single handshake. And now, he was here, stepping through the doors like a man who knew exactly where he belonged. Yet somehow, I felt the impossible tug of recognition before even seeing his eyes. He scanned the room slowly, deliberately, and for the first time all evening, I felt my pulse spike. There was a weight to his presence, not aggressive, but undeniable. People noticed him. They shifted, hushed conversations, turned their heads. And I, staring from my safe corner, felt like I was being measured, assessed, seen in a way I hadn't been in years. I couldn't look away. I swallowed hard, trying to make my heart behave, and in that moment, I felt my wife's hand on my elbow. "Stay with me," she whispered, a tone of command barely hidden beneath forced charm. "Don't wander off. Don't embarrass me." Her words were venom wrapped in silk. I wanted to tell her that I wasn't a child anymore, that embarrassment wasn't something she could assign to me, but I only nodded again. I had learned long ago that arguing with her in public was pointless. Arguments were safe only in the walls of our home, and even then, only sometimes. The owner's gaze swept past me, momentarily catching the glint of something, an expression maybe, or just the light bouncing off my cufflinks. I didn't know. All I knew was that in that single moment, I felt a shift, subtle and terrifying. I existed here, somehow. And not just as a background prop. My thoughts raced, wild and unbidden. Could this man, this stranger with an air of quiet authority, see something in me I had long forgotten? Was it skill, ambition, potential? Or just a ghost of someone I used to be before life and marriage and compromises had dulled me? I didn't have time to find out. My wife was already pulling me toward a circle of people I had no interest in meeting, her laugh echoing too loudly, her presence suffocating. I followed, but my mind was elsewhere. I noticed the way people's eyes lingered slightly longer on him than anyone else, the way conversations faltered when he entered a group. He didn't need to speak to command attention. It came naturally, as if the air itself bent toward him. And I felt, in a way I hadn't in years, a spark of hope. Perhaps tonight wasn't just another reminder of my insignificance. Perhaps tonight, something could change. The first toast began, and champagne flutes were lifted. I watched the crowd cheer, the clinking glasses, the laughter that didn't touch me, and yet, I felt the tension inside me build. My wife's smile was brittle, painted on, a shield for the embarrassment she feared more than anything. Embarrassment by me, as if I were some liability to her social standing. I clenched my jaw, forcing down a rising anger. Not tonight, I told myself. Tonight I will survive this. Minutes dragged, each one a slow march. I kept my eyes discreetly on the owner, who moved gracefully across the room, shaking hands, nodding, acknowledging people without a single ounce of vanity. I wanted to look away, to resign myself to my usual role, but something held me in place. Something in the way he carried himself told me that he might be the only person here who could see me as more than invisible. And then, as if sensing my gaze, he turned. Our eyes met, fleeting at first, and a jolt ran through me, a mix of recognition and disbelief. He didn't smile, he didn't frown. He simply looked. Really looked. And for a heartbeat, the noise, the chatter, the suffocating expectations all faded. It was just him and me, and I felt the stirrings of something I hadn't felt in years, the possibility of being seen. I forced myself to breathe, to stay composed, while the world continued around us. And that's when I realized, I wasn't sure if this was chance, fate, or just my imagination. But one thing was certain, tonight was no longer just a night to survive. It was a night that could change everything. As the band shifted into a new song and the crowd swayed, I felt a mixture of dread and anticipation. My wife was talking to someone nearby, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension that had just begun. And I knew deep down that nothing tonight would be ordinary again. Something had shifted, something waiting to be claimed, but only if I had the courage to step forward. I glanced once more at the owner, and in that brief connection, I felt the first spark of defiance against the life I had been living, the first hint that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to stay in the back anymore. And then the thought hit me like a punch to the chest. What if he's looking for me? Not for what I've become, but for what I was always meant to be. The gala was supposed to be a cage. And yet, for the first time in years, I felt the lock click open. I had perfected the art of disappearing. Not literally, of course, but in every room I entered, I could melt into the background, invisible and unremarkable. Tonight was no exception. While my wife charmed the crowd with her practiced laughter and effortless confidence, I hovered near the edges, blending into the shadows. It was exhausting, like holding your breath for hours, but it had become second nature. People glanced at me briefly and moved on. Conversations continued around me, laughter echoed past my ears, and I reminded myself once again, this was my life, or at least, the version I allowed it to be. My career had been a series of close calls and overlooked promotions, my efforts often unnoticed, my voice drowned out by louder, more assertive men. And marriage had taught me restraint, taught me that silence was safer than speaking my mind. But tonight, the weight of it all felt heavier, almost unbearable. I nursed a glass of sparkling water, pretending to study the intricate patterns of the carpet. Each sip was deliberate, a small act of grounding in a world where I felt untethered. And then I caught sight of him again, the new owner. He wasn't far now, and his presence had a gravitational pull I couldn't ignore. He moved through the crowd with purpose, shaking hands, nodding, acknowledging people in a way that made you feel important even if you weren't. And I realized, painfully, that I hadn't felt important in years. My mind spun with questions I couldn't answer. But I couldn't tear my eyes away. For reasons I didn't yet understand, he had noticed me, or at least he seemed to. It was terrifying and thrilling at the same time, a strange combination I wasn't used to experiencing. My wife noticed my distraction immediately and tugged me closer. "Focus on me," she hissed, a faint edge of irritation in her voice. "Act like you belong here." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Act like I belonged? For years, I had played this role flawlessly, the supportive husband, the quiet observer, the invisible man. But something had shifted. The way he moved, the way he carried himself, it suggested that maybe there was a version of me the world had never truly seen. And tonight, I might finally have a chance to reveal it. I forced a smile and nodded, letting her think she still controlled the evening. She didn't notice the tightening of my jaw or the determination settling in my chest. She never had. But tonight I told myself that could change. Minutes passed like hours. I tried to keep my attention on the people around me, engaging in polite nods and small talk that barely registered. But my mind kept returning to him. Every gesture, every glance, seemed calculated, precise, as if he were scanning the room for a specific person, and that person, somehow, might be me. A part of me wanted to retreat, to blend into the wallpaper and let the night pass without incident. But another part, long dormant, burned with a quiet insistence. You are not invisible. Not tonight. I reminded myself of all the times I had been overlooked, promotions I deserved but didn't get, colleagues who took credit for my work, moments of courage I had held back for fear of ridicule or failure. They all flashed through my mind like a montage of missed opportunities. And in that reflection, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: urgency. This was a night where things could shift, where I could step forward and be seen, not as a prop, not as an afterthought, but as someone who mattered. Then it happened. Our eyes met again. This time, it was longer, deliberate. My heart raced, a mixture of fear, disbelief, and anticipation. There was recognition there, in his gaze, a depth that unsettled me. He wasn't looking at the man my wife displayed to the world. He was looking at me, the one I had buried under years of compromise, invisibility, and quiet resignation. I felt a jolt of adrenaline, the kind that wakes you in the middle of the night with clarity. And I realized, if he saw me, then maybe I could see myself too. Maybe I could finally acknowledge the worth I had spent so long ignoring. The music shifted, signaling another toast, another round of superficial cheers. I raised my glass in polite mimicry, my mind elsewhere, calculating the next step, wondering how much courage it would take to meet this gaze again. My wife was still preoccupied, oblivious to the undercurrent, her focus entirely on maintaining appearances. And for the first time, I understood. Her world was one I didn't have to inhabit if I didn't want to. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. For years, I had been the invisible man, fading into corners, retreating from life's confrontations. But tonight, something had changed. That fleeting moment of acknowledgement from him was a spark. And a spark, I knew, was all it took to ignite a fire. I felt the beginnings of resolve, a quiet, simmering determination that whispered to me through the clamor of the gala. I wasn't here just to survive. I was here to be seen, to reclaim a part of myself that had been dormant for too long. The owner's gaze was the key, or perhaps just the signal, that my life could shift in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. And as I sipped my drink, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease slightly, I realized something else. The real challenge wasn't the gala, or my wife's scrutiny, or even the intimidating presence of the owner. The challenge was me. Could I finally step forward and seize it? Could I finally stop being invisible? The thought lingered, a quiet pulse of anticipation. Somewhere in the crowd, he was watching. And somewhere deep inside, I was ready to be found. Tonight, invisibility would end. And whether I was ready or not, everything was about to change. I felt my chest tighten the moment he stepped closer. The air around him seemed to thrum with a quiet authority, and I realized I couldn't look away. I tried to tell myself it was imagination, that any sense of recognition was my own wishful thinking. But then he stopped, his eyes locking with mine in a way that made my heart stutter. There was no hesitation, no casual glance. He saw me, truly saw me. And in that instant, the world around me, the glittering chandeliers, the polite chatter, my wife's nervous laughter, faded into a blur. I barely noticed her reaction until I felt the shift beside me. She stiffened, her hand gripping my arm like a vice. "Who is he looking at?" she hissed, though she pretended to smile at a passing acquaintance. The words were sharp, the panic in her eyes betraying a fear I had seen before, but never felt so satisfying. The man stepped closer and my mind raced. Recognition? No, it couldn't be. I'd seen him in photos, perhaps glimpsed his name in articles years ago, but nothing personal. And yet, there he was, walking directly to me, purposefully, and stopping only when he was close enough that I could feel the warmth of his presence, the subtle intensity of his gaze. "I've been looking for you for 28 years, his voice was low, almost trembling, and for a moment I thought I misheard. I blinked. The crowd melted around me. I didn't hear the soft music, the murmur of conversations. It was just him and those words, spoken directly to me, as if he knew every hidden corner of my past. I wanted to respond, to speak, to ask how and why, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I swallowed hard, my mind spinning through possibilities, trying to anchor myself. Recognition, curiosity, some kind of connection long buried. It didn't matter. All that mattered was that I was finally seen. My wife's reaction was instantaneous. Her smile faltered, her voice sharp. "Excuse me, but he ignored her entirely, not even a glance in her direction. Her eyes widened in disbelief and frustration, and for the first time, I felt a rush of power I hadn't experienced in years. She, who had orchestrated this night to showcase our perfect image, was now irrelevant to him. And by extension, she was irrelevant to me at that moment. He studied me for a heartbeat longer, and I felt a mixture of fear, hope, and anticipation coursing through me. There was a familiarity, a strange sense of destiny, in the way he regarded me. My chest tightened, a cocktail of emotions I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Recognition, validation, fear, excitement, they all collided inside me. I remembered flashes of my past, brief and disjointed, moments where I had been overlooked, passed over, underestimated. And suddenly, I realized that this man might see the potential in me that everyone else had ignored. The thought was exhilarating and terrifying at once. Could he really know who I was? Could he see through the years of invisibility and compromise to the core of me? He extended a hand, not formally, not politely, but with the kind of certainty that demanded a response. "Do you remember me?" he asked softly, almost reverently. There was a hint of emotion in his tone, something that tugged at the edges of a memory I had long tried to suppress. I hesitated, unsure if I should speak, unsure if speaking would break the spell. "I think My voice faltered, but my eyes stayed locked on his. Somewhere deep in my mind, fragments began to piece together. A face, a moment, a connection I had thought lost. And with that realization came a surge of adrenaline, a recognition not just of him, but of myself. For years, I had lived in the shadows, quietly accepting my place. But in that moment, I felt a shift, subtle but undeniable. The invisible man could not remain invisible when someone remembered him, sought him out, and needed him for reasons I didn't yet understand. The crowd, the gala, my wife's stern presence, they all receded. I was no longer a background character in someone else's story. I was suddenly central, pivotal, alive. I took a cautious step forward and he smiled, just barely, a small acknowledgement that spoke volumes. It was enough to ignite a spark, a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in decades. My pulse raced as my thoughts oscillated between disbelief and exhilaration. Could this be real? Could someone truly see me, not the husband, not the professional, not the prop, but me? My wife tried to intervene again, her voice rising. "He's mistaken. You can't," but I barely registered her words. The man before me had awakened something inside, a quiet but firm conviction that I was ready to be seen, ready to be acknowledged, ready to step into the light. I forced a breath, steadying myself, and met his gaze without flinching. For the first time all evening, I felt grounded, present, and strangely powerful. This wasn't just recognition, it was a moment of reclamation, a chance to step into a version of my life I had long imagined but never dared to reach. As he spoke my name, softly, almost reverently, I felt a shiver run through me. Every ounce of invisibility I had carried for years seemed to lift, replaced by anticipation, tension, and something dangerously close to hope. The gala, my wife, the entire world faded around us. There was only this connection, only this acknowledgement, and it was enough to change everything. And yet, even in that overwhelming moment, a question lingered in my mind, sharp and insistent. Why now? Why me? The answer wasn't clear, but I knew instinctively that it would reveal itself in due time. For now, all that mattered was that for the first time in decades, I was noticed, remembered, sought after. And the feeling, unfamiliar and intoxicating, coursed through my veins like electricity. My mind reeled with possibilities. Opportunities one hadn't dared imagine began to surface, flickering like distant stars just within reach. Could this be the turning point? The chance to step into the life I had dreamed of while trapped in shadows? The thought made my stomach tighten with both fear and excitement. And as he reached out again, a subtle gesture that demanded no words, I realized that tonight, nothing would ever be the same. The invisible man had been seen, and the story, my story, was only just beginning. Her reaction was immediate, and it hit me harder than I expected. My wife's smile faltered, then snapped into something sharper, colder, the kind of anger that disguised vulnerability as control. "Who is he talking to?" she demanded, her voice trembling slightly, though she tried to mask it with authority. I felt a strange surge of satisfaction, a quiet, dangerous pleasure that she, for once, didn't have the upper hand. I glanced at her, my mind racing. For years, she had controlled every social scenario, every perception of us, every interaction I had with the world. Tonight, she was blind to the fact that the world had shifted under our feet. And for the first time, I felt untethered from her command. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The man before me had already taken that space. He smiled, subtle but unmistakable, a recognition that went beyond words. And in that smile, I saw a reflection of the man I once hoped to be, the one buried under decades of compromise, of self-doubt, of invisibility. For a moment, I could almost breathe without restraint, without feeling her grip on my life tightening around me. "Excuse me," she snapped, stepping closer, her voice sharp. "I believe you have me mistaken." Her words were clipped, rehearsed, but the tremor in her tone betrayed panic. I felt an unfamiliar warmth, a thrill that came from watching her lose composure. It wasn't cruel, it was liberating. For once, I wasn't just a pawn in her carefully curated game. The owner ignored her entirely. His focus remained on me, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I've been looking for you for 28 years, he said again, softer this time, almost reverently. The weight of those words pressed against me, settling into corners of my mind I hadn't dared explore. Who was I, really, beyond the shadows of her expectations, beyond the compromises of my career, beyond the quiet life I had accepted as fate? I felt my pulse quicken. The room around me, the laughter, the glasses, the chatter, blurred into insignificance. I was seeing clearly for the first time in years. This moment, this recognition, was both frightening and exhilarating. I realized that my life had always been waiting for a spark like this, a catalyst to remind me of the man I could still be. My wife's face reddened, her jaw tightening as she tried to reclaim control. "This is absurd," she hissed, her voice barely above a whisper, but the audience of their peers and onlookers made her fury more performative than effective. I met her gaze calmly for the first time in years, and I saw it there, the crack in her confidence, the realization that I was no longer entirely hers to mold or contain. I felt a surge of clarity. For too long, I had let her define me, direct me, limit me. Tonight I had a choice. I could stay in the shadows, continue to be her silent accessory, or I could step into the light and accept the attention and opportunity that had found me. And for the first time, I understood that choice didn't belong to her. It belonged to me. The crowd murmured softly, sensing the tension, the shift in dynamics. I felt eyes on me, curious, uncertain, but instead of shrinking, I stood taller, letting the weight of years of neglect and compromise lift ever so slightly. The owner's eyes never wavered. "It's really you," he said, a quiet affirmation that felt like a bridge to a long-lost version of myself. I swallowed, steadying my breath. "I didn't expect this," I managed to say, my voice calm but layered with emotion. The words felt strange coming out, almost foreign. I wasn't used to speaking for myself, to acknowledging the gravity of my own life. But in that instant, I didn't care. I felt grounded, alive, ready to reclaim a part of me that had been dormant for too long. She tried once more to interject, but I ignored her. For the first time, her control didn't dictate my reactions. I realized that this confrontation, this collision of past and present, of perception and reality, was necessary. It wasn't just about the gala or the recognition or even him. It was about me taking ownership of who I was, who I had always been beneath the layers of doubt and compromise. A flicker of fear crossed my mind. What if I ruined everything? What if her wrath had consequences? But it was immediately replaced by determination. Fear had kept me hidden for too long. Now, possibility coursed through me like electricity. I could feel it in my bones. The invisible man had choices, and one of them was to finally step out of the shadows. The owner smiled again, a small, quiet gesture that spoke volumes. It wasn't reassurance, not entirely. It was acknowledgement, recognition. And in that acknowledgement, I felt the stirrings of courage. The courage to confront my past, to confront my life, and perhaps, to confront my wife, not with anger, but with clarity and self-assuredness. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment, the years of tension, frustration, and quiet resentment all converged. She wasn't the enemy, she was a catalyst. She had pushed me into complacency, yes, but now I had a choice to break free. And I would. The room shifted around us, the gala continuing in its glittering chaos, but I was anchored in a single, undeniable truth. I had been seen. And being seen changes everything. I took a deep breath, letting the tension in my shoulders ease slightly. The night was no longer hers to control, and it was no longer mine to endure passively. It was a turning point, a collision that forced me to confront what I had been avoiding for decades. And for the first time, I felt not fear, but a quiet, simmering excitement. As I met the owner's gaze once more, I realized that this was just the beginning. My life, my choices, my identity, all of it was suddenly mine to reclaim. And somewhere deep inside, a spark lit, whispering the promise of transformation, of empowerment, and of a future that had been waiting for me all along. The gala had shifted, the glittering chaos around me now secondary to the tension thrumming in my chest. I could still feel her gaze, sharp and accusatory, but it barely registered anymore. Something deeper had awoken within me, a sense of purpose, of recognition, and, for the first time in years, the courage to act. And then the challenge arrived. He approached with a calm certainty, the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. His words were measured, precise, each one carrying weight. "I need to speak with you. Privately." There was no hesitation, no alternative. The invitation wasn't polite, it was necessary, urgent. My pulse quickened. This wasn't a casual encounter. It was a test, and I wasn't sure I was ready. I glanced at my wife, her face a mask of disbelief and subtle fury. But the decision wasn't hers to make anymore. Not tonight. I nodded subtly, excusing myself, and felt the air change as I followed him out of the crowd, leaving the noise and glitter behind. The hallway was quieter, the dim lighting giving the space an intimate weight. It felt like stepping into a new world, one where I could finally exist as more than a shadow. He stopped and turned to me, the intensity in his gaze unwavering. "Do you remember what I said?" he asked quietly, almost reverently. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm of adrenaline and nerves inside me. "You've been looking for me for 28 years. He nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "And now I've found you. But finding you is only the beginning. There's work to be done, choices to make, and a path that has waited for you longer than you know." His words were layered, heavy with implication, and I realized that this was more than recognition. It was an opportunity, a challenge, a call to step fully into a life I had long ignored. I swallowed hard. My mind spun with questions. Why me? Why now? What exactly did he want? But a strange clarity accompanied them. This wasn't about him alone. It was about reclaiming the part of myself I had allowed to remain dormant for decades. And for once, I felt ready to face it. The first challenge was subtle, deceptively simple. He asked me to recount my experiences, not the superficial achievements, but the choices I had made, the compromises I had accepted, the regrets that had silently accumulated over the years. Each answer was an emotional minefield, dredging up memories of missed promotions, quiet resignations, and the endless series of small betrayals I had endured silently. Yet, as I spoke, something remarkable happened. The act of articulating my history, my pain, my struggle became a form of empowerment. I wasn't just telling a story, I was reclaiming it. He listened without interruption, his eyes steady, absorbing every nuance, every hesitation, every flicker of emotion. And in his silence, I felt the weight of validation. For the first time in years, someone understood, someone acknowledged not only my presence but my journey. And with that acknowledgement came an unexpected surge of confidence, a tentative but real sense that I could begin to define my future on my own terms. But challenges, as I quickly realized, are never just intellectual, they are visceral. My wife's shadow loomed in my mind, her expectations, judgments, and subtle manipulations a constant undercurrent. Could I confront her control, even as I stepped into this new role? The tension between liberation and loyalty pressed on me, threatening to unravel the fragile thread of courage I had begun to weave. He seemed to sense my internal struggle. "It won't be easy," he said quietly. "The world hasn't prepared you for this, and neither has anyone else. But the first step is recognizing that you are capable, that you are worthy, and that you have the right to act. Everything else follows." His words hit me like a revelation. Recognition had sparked courage, now understanding gave me direction. I could feel it settling in, a tangible shift, subtle but irreversible. This was more than an opportunity, it was a turning point. As we talked, he laid out the parameters of the first real challenge, a test of judgment, initiative, and composure. It wasn't about skill alone, nor about proving myself to him. It was about proving to myself that I could make decisions with clarity, confidence, and integrity. The stakes were high, but the possibility of growth, of stepping fully into my potential, was higher. I felt the tension in my shoulders ease slightly as the conversation progressed, replaced by a quiet, simmering determination. Fear still lingered, of course. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of losing control, but it was tempered by the realization that I had nothing left to lose by embracing this moment. Finally, he nodded, signaling the end of the discussion and the beginning of action. "Your first challenge begins tonight," he said simply. "How you respond will define what comes next. Choose wisely." I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the words settle into my mind and body. This was no longer a gala or a social exercise. It was a crucible, and I had been thrown into the fire. But for the first time in years, I didn't shrink back. I stepped forward, heart pounding, mind alert, ready to meet the test with everything I had. The hallway felt charged, electric with possibility. And as I glanced back briefly at the glittering ballroom, the crowd, my wife still ensconced in her performative perfection, I knew one thing with certainty: tonight would change everything. I was no longer invisible, no longer a background figure in someone else's story. I was ready to take the first step, and with it, claim a part of myself I had long denied. As the door closed behind us, the noise fading into a distant murmur, I realized that challenges don't just test skill or intelligence, they test courage, character, and heart. And for the first time, I was ready to be tested. The first challenge was nothing like I expected. It wasn't a grand gesture, a dramatic confrontation, or a high-stakes decision in front of an audience. It was quiet, subtle, yet every bit as demanding as a storm. The owner had placed me in a scenario that tested my instincts, my judgment, and my ability to act decisively under pressure. And I realized immediately that this wasn't just about proving myself to him, it was about proving to myself that I could reclaim control of my life. I stood in the small, dimly lit office he had led me to, the hum of the gala a distant echo behind the closed door. The space was intimate, almost oppressive, forcing focus. He handed me a folder, neatly organized, containing details that seemed mundane at first glance: figures, schedules, minor discrepancies. But the way he looked at me, calm and expectant, told me that these details held hidden significance. My heart raced. One wrong move, one hesitation, and I would fail this subtle test. Your first decision defines everything, he said softly. Not just the outcome, but your confidence, your clarity, your courage. Trust yourself. I opened the folder, my hands steadying despite the surge of adrenaline. Each page revealed a series of minor yet complex problems. Timelines that didn't align, opportunities that had been overlooked, small mistakes with disproportionate consequences. I had to make choices quickly, weigh the options, anticipate the outcomes. The pressure was suffocating, yet intoxicating. For the first time in years, I felt alive in my decision-making. I thought back to my past, to the countless occasions when I had allowed fear, hesitation, or the need to appease others to govern my choices. And I realized something profound. Fear had kept me small. Hesitation had kept me invisible. And now, I had the chance to act differently, to step fully into the role I had always imagined for myself. I began prioritizing, calculating risks, weighing consequences. Each decision felt like a small victory, a confirmation that I still had the capacity to lead, to judge, to act with integrity. The owner watched silently, a quiet presence that neither pressured nor distracted. It was terrifying and empowering in equal measure. Time passed in a blur. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, each moment testing my patience and focus. I felt a shift inside me, subtle but undeniable, a growing awareness of my own competence, my ability to navigate complexity, and the power I had overlooked for so long. Confidence, long dormant, was slowly rising, like a tide reclaiming land it had once abandoned. When I finally looked up, the owner's gaze met mine. He nodded, a small but unmistakable gesture of approval. Relief and pride surged through me. "You've handled it well," he said quietly. "But this is just the beginning. How you carry yourself now will determine everything that follows." The weight of his words settled in my chest, heavy but invigorating. I realized that the turning point wasn't just in completing the challenge, it was in embracing the realization that I could act decisively, trust my instincts, and navigate uncertainty without succumbing to fear. That I had the power to define my path, rather than merely react to it. And then I felt it, the spark of momentum, the adrenaline of achievement, the quiet thrill of competence, and the dawning realization that I was no longer constrained by the roles I had been forced into. I was no longer the invisible man, the shadow in the background, the silent observer. I was active, present, and capable. As the owner closed the folder and stood, he gave me a final nod, an unspoken affirmation that this was only the first step of many. My mind raced with possibilities, each one a thread of opportunity stretching into a future I had only dreamed of. The fear lingered, of course, the stakes were real, but it was tempered by a newfound clarity and determination. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease, replaced by a quiet confidence that pulsed through me like electricity. I realized something vital: turning points are never loud. They are subtle, almost invisible, until you recognize them. And then, once recognized, they change everything. As I followed him back toward the gala, the noise and glitter returning to my awareness, I felt a shift in perspective. I wasn't just participating in this event anymore. I was engaged, present, and ready to act. The turning point had arrived, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The challenges ahead were daunting, yes, but for the first time, I felt prepared not just to meet them, but to conquer them, and to finally claim the life that had always been within my grasp. The gala was no longer a glittering backdrop. It had become a stage for reckoning. I felt the pull of the past like a current beneath my feet, insistent and unrelenting. Every memory I had buried, the compromises, the missed chances, the quiet frustrations, the subtle betrayals, was surfacing now, demanding attention. And there he was, the owner, his presence steady, almost imperious, a reminder that I could no longer hide. I found myself face to face with my wife once again. She had recovered some of her composure, but the tension in her posture was unmistakable. She was a master of appearances, but appearances only went so far when confronted with raw, undeniable truth. And tonight that truth was me. Her eyes narrowed, searching, calculating. "You think you can just step out of place?" she hissed, though her voice faltered slightly. I could feel the history between us, the shared past, the resentment, the unspoken disappointments, pressing against my chest. For years, I had deferred to her, allowed her to dictate the narrative of our lives. But tonight, something had shifted. I was no longer a participant in her performance. I was an active player in my own story. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I'm done staying in the shadows," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I've spent years letting you define who I am, where I stand, and what I'm worth. That ends now." The words felt strange, liberating, and terrifying all at once. I could feel the shift in her, the subtle shock of realizing that I wasn't bound by her expectations anymore. Before she could respond, the owner stepped closer. His gaze met mine, not just seeing, but affirming, reinforcing the courage that had begun to settle in my chest. "You've confronted the first challenges," he said softly. "Now comes the most important one, confronting the past that holds you back. The mistakes, the regrets, the compromises, they don't define you unless you let them. Face them and you gain control." I felt the weight of those words like a physical force. He wasn't speaking abstractly. He was holding up a mirror to every choice I had ever made, every moment I had allowed fear or hesitation to govern my actions. And now I had a chance to answer, not with avoidance, but with clarity and resolve. Images flashed in my mind, the promotions I hadn't pursued, colleagues who had stepped over me, conversations I had stayed silent in, opportunities that had slipped through my fingers. The regrets were heavy, almost suffocating, but beneath them was a truth I hadn't acknowledged. I had survived, endured, and learned. And survival alone had given me tools, insight, and resilience that I could now harness. I turned back to my wife, her expression a mix of disbelief and defiance. "You don't control me," I said, the words firm, carrying years of suppressed authority. "Not tonight, not ever again. This isn't about you or your perception anymore. It's about me, finally living in my own reality." Her eyes flashed with anger, but it was tempered by the realization that I wasn't bluffing. The years of compliance, of quiet acquiescence, were over. And in that moment, I felt a surge of empowerment unlike anything I had known. I wasn't just reclaiming my career, my recognition, or my opportunities, I was reclaiming myself. The owner's presence was a silent anchor, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this confrontation. His nod was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it carried immense weight. It signaled affirmation, approval, and trust in my capacity to face what I had long avoided. And with that, I realized that the confrontation wasn't just external, it was internal. I had to forgive myself, accept my past, and use it as fuel for the future. The room seemed to shift around us, the gala continuing in its glittering oblivion, but I was anchored, focused, and present. I understood now that confronting the past wasn't about reliving pain or seeking revenge. It was about understanding, accepting, and moving forward with intention. I took a measured breath, feeling the tension in my chest ease slightly. The confrontation had been necessary, cathartic, and enlightening. I had stepped out of the shadows of both my past mistakes and my wife's control. And in that liberation, I felt something powerful: readiness. Readiness to embrace the challenges ahead, to act decisively, and to finally live as the person I had always been capable of becoming. As the night progressed, the gala faded into insignificance. The lights, the music, the laughter, they all existed, but I moved through them with a new perspective, a new clarity. I was no longer defined by fear, by compromise, or by the expectations of others. I had confronted the past, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my power. And deep inside, I knew that the final chapter was approaching. The culmination of recognition, challenge, and confrontation would demand everything I had learned, everything I had become. But for the first time in my life, I didn't just feel ready, I felt unstoppable. The final moments of the gala felt surreal, as if the night itself had been waiting for this conclusion. The glittering chandeliers, the polite laughter, the murmured conversations, all of it receded into the background. What remained was clarity, presence, and a sense of ownership over my life that I had never known before. I stood there, chest steady, heart still racing, but in a controlled, powerful way. The owner's gaze met mine, calm, affirming, and filled with an understanding that transcended words. "You've come far," he said softly. "Tonight, you've shown not just competence, but courage, insight, and integrity. You've reclaimed what was always yours." I allowed myself a small, reflective smile. Reclaimed. The word resonated deeply. For years, I had been a background character in my own life, deferring to the expectations of others, shrinking under pressure, and letting fear dictate my choices. Tonight, that ended. The invisible man was gone, replaced by someone fully present, fully acknowledged, fully alive. I glanced at my wife, who had recovered some composure, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She had always been a master of control, orchestrating appearances, manipulating perceptions. But the power she held over me had dissolved. She realized, finally, that I had stepped beyond her grasp. And I felt no triumph in her discomfort, only liberation. For the first time, I was free not just from her control, but from the limitations I had accepted in silence for decades. The owner extended a hand, and this time, I reached for it willingly, without hesitation. His grip was firm, reassuring, a silent confirmation of trust and respect. The recognition, the challenges, the confrontations, they had all led to this moment. Acknowledgement of my worth, acceptance of my past, and permission to step into the future on my own terms. I reflected on the journey, each chapter of my life that had seemed mundane or overlooked now revealing itself as preparation. The years of compromise, the moments of quiet endurance, the constant self-restraint, they had forged resilience, patience, and insight. And those qualities, I realized, were my true advantage. Turning my attention to the room, I saw faces that had once seemed indifferent or judgmental. Tonight, they were witnesses to something deeper, a man stepping into his own power, fully present and fully accountable. I no longer needed their validation, but their recognition was a testament to the transformation I had embraced. A quiet confidence settled in me, stronger than any fleeting pride or superficial triumph. I had faced fear, confronted the past, and accepted the challenges set before me. I had reclaimed not just recognition, but identity, autonomy, and agency. And that, I knew, was far more valuable than any accolade, promotion, or social approval. I turned back to the owner. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "Not just for finding me, but for reminding me that I have the right to act, to choose, and to define my life." He smiled faintly. "The world will test you again, but you are ready. The important thing is that you've learned to trust yourself." I nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle. Trust in myself. It was a phrase I had long avoided, dismissed, or feared. But now it felt natural, almost inevitable. I had earned it, not through perfection, but through courage, introspection, and the willingness to step into uncertainty. As the gala wound down, the crowd began to thin, but I moved through it with a new awareness. Each step was deliberate, confident, and intentional. I was no longer an accessory to someone else's narrative. I was the author of my own story, fully accountable and fully alive. The night air hit me as I stepped outside, crisp and invigorating. I took a deep breath, letting it fill me, steadying my heartbeat. The city lights shimmered like possibilities scattered across the horizon. For the first time in decades, I felt unburdened, empowered, and ready to embrace what came next. I realized then that the journey wasn't over. Life would continue to present challenges, moments of doubt, and opportunities for growth. But the difference now was profound. I knew I had the strength, clarity, and courage to meet them. I had been seen, acknowledged, and tested, and I had emerged fully, unapologetically myself. And as I walked away from the gala, leaving the glitter and expectation behind, I felt a quiet certainty. I was no longer invisible. I had reclaimed my identity, my power, and my life. And nothing, no fear, no expectation, no past regret, could take that away from me. The night stretched ahead, full of potential, and I welcomed it. Because finally I was ready. Fully, Completely, undeniably ready.